Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Samach Gimel, 63. We are on the last word on Samach Bet and Bet. And this was sort of a last minute switch, so my apologies for not having something to share on screen. But yesterday we concluded, we actually had this machlokus between Abaye and Rava as to let's see, as to whether or not, let's see, let's go back to the beginning of Samach Bet Amud Aleph. It's all when, um, actually, all the way back to Samach Aleph Amud Bet, that the machlokas was the following. So if one served an idol out of love or out of fear, so the question is what does that exactly mean? But we'll use Rashi's interpretation that it means that because the person loved somebody, so maybe their future wife or their current wife, said, "Hey, why don't you worship this idol?" And the person said, "Well, I'm not really a big fan of the idol, but I'm a big fan of you, so I'm going to worship." Or somebody comes and with a gun to your head and says, you got to serve this idol, and so as a result, even though it's one of the big three for which one is supposed to give up their life, but if one didn't give up their life, one could argue one way to understand this is it's talking about. So Abaye says you're liable, that you're still engaging, that even though you're engaging in idol worship for a different reason, you're still engaging in idol worship, and therefore you're subject to punishment. Meaning that in this case, if you didn't realize what you were doing wrong, you would be obligated to bring a chatas offering. If you did realize, you would be subject to the death penalty. And whereas Rava says, no, that's not true. You're exempt. You're exempt from liability. And so as a result, and we tried several times to bring proofs one way or the other. In the end, of course, we paskin, this is not one of the exceptions. So we paskin like Rava that you're not liable for serving an idol out of love or out of fear. But we then had a situation where there was a story of Rabbi Zakkai teaching a brisa in front of Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan said, "Listen, you can't teach that in here. You have to go out." And there were two versions of it, and in both ways of the discussion, the machlokus between Abaye and Rava ended up coming into our conversation. So that's the background of where we are. And in the course of the second of those conversations, we cited a statement by Rabbi Ami. And that's what we're going to begin with. We're going to analyze that statement of Rabbi Ami. And let's take a look and see what it says. Gufa. That last word on Samach Bet and Bet, and we quickly turn to Samach Gimel Amud Aleph. Amar Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Ami says, Zibach v'kiter v'nisach be'elem echad. If you engaged in a variety of different actions for an idol, you slaughtered an offering, you burned an offering, you poured a libation. If you all did all of that in one moment, in one time period of lacking knowledge that this was going to be a problem, so the question is, are you obligated for each of these actions to bring a chatas, a sin offering, on an individual basis? Or do we say that it's one period of uncertainty, of lack of knowledge, and so as a result of unawareness, and so as a result, you're only obligated in one sin offering. Eino chayav ela achas. So he says that you're only liable to one sin offering. So Amra Baye, my time of the Rabbi Ami. Why does Rabbi Ami say that? So Amra Kra, lo sa'avdeim, you shall not serve them. So sa'avdeim suggests multiple methods of service. Hakaz of asan kulan avodah achas. All of the different kinds of services can constitute one service, and so as a result, they're subject to only a single pasuk. So that is Abaye's suggested proof for Rabbi Ami's statement that even though there is a separate prohibition of slaughtering an offering or burning an offering or pouring a libation for an idol, because each of them are elements of things that are done in the Beis Hamikdash, and so as a result, you're not allowed to do them for an idol. So nonetheless, if you didn't realize that it was prohibited, and it was a single instance of being aware that it was prohibited, you're only going to be subject to one chatas offering. So now, fourth line on Samach Gimel Amid Aleph, third word on the line. Umi Amar Abaye, Haki, did Abaye really say this? V'Amar Abaye, Shalosh Ishtachavos Ba'avodas HaKochavim Lama. There are three references to bowing down to idols that are in the Torah, three times that the prohibition is said. And Rashi tells us, if we take a look in the end of the third line of the narrow lines of Rashi, Shalosh Ishtachavos, Los Ishtachavelahem, Daseres Hadibros. So one is in last week's parsha of the with the 10 commandments and saying don't bow down to them, and Kilos Ishtachavel El Acher, that you can't worship another god. That's in Shmos Lamed Dalid, and Los Ishtachavel Elohayim, and you can't bow down to their gods. That's in this week's parsha, in Parshas Mishpatim. So and if you might ask, well, what about the second set of 10 commandments in Dvarim, where it also repeats bowing down? Lo chashiv. That one is not considered worthy of being counted separately. Da'adure kamahader. That's just a review. Moshe liYisrael Masha Shama B'Sinai. He's just saying again what they heard at Har Sinai. So as a result, that doesn't constitute a separate repetition that requires an accounting. But in any event, we now have these three different times that it says that you're prohibited to bow down to an idol. So what do they all come to teach us? So beginning of the fifth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th line, Akas lekadarka. One is to tell you you can't do bowing down if that's the way you're supposed to worship this idol. V'akas shelo kedarka. And one is telling us that also that even if it's not the usual way to bow down to this idol, that's not the way you worship the idol, it's also going to be prohibited. V'akas lechalek. And then the third one, and this is the most important for what our purposes are, is to tell us that every different form of idol worship causes you to be subject to a separate chatas offering. And so as a result, that is very different from what Rabbi Ami says. So here Abaye explained Rabbi Ami and said that it gave a source for why all of them, while all these different actions in one moment of unawareness is going to cause you to be only liable to one chatas offering, and yet Abaye himself says that you're subject to multiple. So lidvarav de Rabbi Ami kamar. Abaye was just trying to explain Rabbi Ami. V'lei lo svirale, but he did not agree with Rabbi Ami, and so as a result, that's the situation. So we're okay. So, but now we're going to look at Abaye's statement. Gufa Amar Abaye Shalosh Ishtachavos Ba'avoda Kochavim Lama Achas L'Kadarka V'Achas Shalo Kadarka V'Achas L'Chalek, as we just said. So we have three different references to Hishtachava, to bowing down. One is for that's because that's the usual manner that the idol is worshipped. One is because it's not the usual manner, and one is to tell us that every different kinds of action that you take is subject to a different chatas offering. L'kedarka. Now, 1 second. 1 second, because when you just said that one of them is to tell us that if it's the right way to pray to the idol, you're going to be subject to the penalty of the death penalty for idol worship if you engage in bowing down to the idol. We don't need that for that. We don't need to use one of the hishtachavas for that, because may echa ya'avdu hagoyim ha'ela nafka. We have a separate pasuk. This is a pasuk in Dvarim, Parak Yud Bet, pasuk Lamed, where it says, not the full quote, but Hishamer L'cha. Oh, here's the quote. Pentena Kesh Achareihem. Watch out not to be follow in their ways. Achreihi shamdam mipanecha. That after you destroy them, that you have to be careful. Upen tidrosh le'eloheim. You're going to go check out their gods, lemor, and say, Eicha yavdu hagoyim ha'ele es Eloheim ve'esek kain gamani. How did these people that we killed out, how did they worship God? Maybe I want to do the same. So this shows that pasuk itself shows that there's a prohibition on worshiping gods in their normal manner. So we don't need a hishtachava, one of the repetitions of the bowing down prohibition to tell us that you can't worship an idol in its normal way. We have another pasuk, Ella achas kadarka vishalo kadarka. No, what it means by the first one is that it's somewhat in the usual manner, but not entirely in the usual manner. So what does that mean? So thankfully, Rashi helps us out. So if we take a look at Rashi, it's about 15 so lines down in the, maybe 17 lines down in the Rashi on Samach Gimel Amud Aleph. Look kadarka v'shelo kadarka shehishtachava hi lahach avodas kochavim kadarka v'shelo kadarka kagon shedarka la'avod derech kibud. So what it means is that this idol is worshipped in a very respectful manner. You don't have to do something embarrassing and disgusting in order to worship this idol. And therefore, but bowing is not that method. And so maybe it is kissing, or maybe it's hugging, or maybe it's, bringing a sacrifice. But whatever it is, it's a respectful manner. And so as a result, bowing as also a respectful manner is also going to be prohibited for this based on the first repetition of the prohibition of bowing down. The achas l'shelo kedarka. And then the second time that we get the prohibition of bowing down, it's to tell us that even if, and we can go back into the Gemara now, even if the idol is worshipped only through disgusting methods, meaning, like defecating in front of the idol, or doing other disgusting things in front of the idol, or throwing a rock at the idol. You might have thought, well, bowing down, that's disrespectful because you're supposed to be disrespectful. So now when you're respectful, maybe that's disrespectful. No. When you're bowing down is always considered on some level an appropriate method of praying to an idol, and therefore it's totally prohibited no matter the manner in which the idol is supposed to be prayed to. And so as a result, that's why we have the second repetition of the prohibition of bowing to an idol. And the third prohibition, v'achas l'chalik, and that one is the one that we've been discussing that's relevant here, because Abaye says that if you do bowing and slaughtering and spilling of blood and burning incense, etc., all of those, for each and every one of those items, you would be subject to a different chatas offering if you had forgotten that this, in fact, was a prohibited action. Okay, so that concludes that, and we now go back to our Mishnah. And our Mishnah said, "Hamekablo alav be'eloha ha'omer lo eli ata." If he accepts himself as a god, this idol, and he says to it, "You are my god." So the point is that there are a number of different ways that we can read this. It could be that the acceptance is a separate category, and from saying "you are my God," or which is the simplest read, and that's the way that Rashi reads it. And so let's take a look and see how the Gemara understands it. So Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravua, Amar Rav. So it's said in the name of Rav, Kevan Sha'amar Lo Eliata Chayiv. Once you say that you are my God, then you're liable. Lamai, 1 second. What in the world is Rav Nachman? What are we learning in Rav's statement? Iliktala, if you're telling me that it's about killing the person, masnizini, that's our Mishnah. Ella karban. So, all right, you want to tell me that it's talking about a karban? But even so, va'afilu rabbanan, even according to the rabbis, who say in Maseches Krisos, as we're going to say in just a moment, that that when it comes to blasphemy, you're not liable to a chatas offering because it's not an action. If we take a look in Rashi, Rashi is basically smack in the middle of the narrow lines of Rashi, Samach Gimel, and maybe a little bit further than the lower down than that. Va'afilu Rabbanan bitmia. This is a question. Depligi Rabbanan bekrisos b'megadef Aleha de Rabbi Akiva, that they argue with respect to blasphemy on Rabbi Akiva. Da Amre Megadev Eno maybe Karban de Be'in and Maisa, that they say, the rabbis say, that in order for you to be liable to a chatas offering, you have to have some sort of action. And so as a result, they argue that when you have blasphemy, which is just speaking, if you don't realize that it's prohibited, you are not going to be subject to a chatas offering because it's just a speech, and speech is an action. Tanya, but 1 second, we have a brisa. Eino chayev ella al davar sheyesh bo maisa, that you're only liable for something where there's an action. Kagon zivuach, like slaughtering, v'kitur, and offering, v'nisuch, and pouring a libation, v'hishtachava, and bowing down. So I might have thought that maybe what Rav was saying was that he was teaching us the Chiddush, that in fact bowing down is subject to a chatas offering, but we already know that he's subject to a chatas offering because we have a brisa that specifically says that. V'amreish Lakish, Mantana Hishtachava. Who is the Tana that's teaching us Hishtachava? Rabbi Akiva. It's Rabbi Akiva. The Amr Lo Be'in and Maisa, because he's the one who says that we don't need a Maisa. Mikal D'Rabbanan Savri Be'in and Maisa. So as a result, so 1 second. So that implies that the rabbis are saying that you would not be subject to a sin offering, and yet Rav is telling us that you are subject to a sin offering. So that's an inconsistency. So ki kamar Rav nami lo Rabbi Akiva kamar. Now, when Rav made his statement, that saying the statement of you are my God is enough to cause somebody to be liable for a chatas, so that was according to Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva pshita, but it's obvious according to Rabbi Akiva. Haina megadif. What's the difference between blasphemy and saying you are my God? In both cases, it's a verbal action, and that is sufficient, according to Rabbi Akiva, to cause one to be subject to a sin offering. So again, initially we have this statement of Rav, and then we ask the question: how could that statement be said? Because after all, the rabbis say the exact opposite, and originally we assume that the Rav is speaking according to the rabbis. So we say no, he's speaking according to Rabbi Akiva. But in that case, why is he needed to speak in the name of Rabbi Akiva? Because it's obvious. So here's what I might have thought. I would have thought that the only time you're obligated to a sacrifice offering for a sin offering is when it comes to blasphemy. Because it is explicitly written that is that blasphemy gets kares if you don't, when you sin intentionally, and you aren't subject to the death penalty. I should note. Aval hacha. But when it comes to saying you are my God, where it is not subject to kares explicitly in the Torah, amalo, maybe you would not have to bring a sin offering. So kamash malan, that's why Rav needs to tell us that in fact you need to bring a sin offering. And what's the basis for it? Meaning, once you tell me that maybe it's because it says kares by blasphemy, but not by you are my God. So maybe that should make it a difference, and we should not have the same rule. But no, there is a connection between these two topics. That when it comes to the sin of the golden calf, the Jewish people bowed to it. They slaughtered before it, meaning they slaughtered sacrifices for it, and they spoke about it. So the point is, and they said, "These are your gods, Israel." So that's the point. Is that the pasuk it specifically is dealing with. In fact, let's see what the pasuk says. V'yomru Eila Elohecha Yisrael Asher Ha'alucha Me'eretz Yisrael. These are your gods Israel, that took you out of the land of Egypt. So the point is that we mention both action and speech together, so it shows that you're supposed to treat them similarly. So that is what Rav is teaching us, that even though you might have thought that just saying "you are my God" would not subject you to a sin offering if you did it not without realizing that there was a prohibition. So no, in fact, you are subject to a sin offering. That's why Rob made the statement. Rabbi Yochanan ilmale vav shebehelucha. So having raised this pasuk from the story of the golden calf, the Rabbi Yochanan makes a statement that's associated with it, and he says, without the vav, nischayvu rasha'ehem shal Yisrael klaya. Then those who would do evil to Israel, which is actually a way of saying nicely the Jewish people, they would have all been subject to extermination, because the point being that the vav in helucha means multiple gods. That changes and so as a result, what effectively, according to Rabbi Yochanan, he understands the Jewish people are saying is, of course, our God up in heaven, who we don't see, and it was was the one who took us out of Egypt also, but he had helpers down below, and so that is and because we give some credit to our God, to the God in heaven, so as a result, that's why they weren't subject to complete destruction. Ketanai. And now that point of view is a machlokas tanaim, because acherim omrim ilmale vav shebehalucha nischayvu rishayhem shel Yisrael kulaya. So again, others said, and this is the position that Rabbi Yochanan takes, that without that vav, everybody would be subject to extermination. Amar lo Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Shimon ben Yochai, however, disagreed. But that's in some ways worse. Anybody who pairs a god with Hashem, nekar min haolam, that person is going to be torn from the world. Shene'amar bilti laHashem levado, only to Hashem alone. So ela matal lomar asher ha'elucha. What is the point of saying that? Why did the people use the plural? She'ivu Elohot harbe, because they were desiring multiple gods, and so as a result, that is the understanding of that. That there's a machlokas about the understanding of that pasuk, and again, we have two different approaches as to which is better. Is it better to at least recognize God, or is it like, how could you even consider God with anybody else? That's even worse. So those are two different approaches, and you can think about, which one you think is actually better or worse. It's an interesting philosophical question. Okay, so the next line in our Mishnah, aval hamegapef v'hamenashek, if you hug or you kiss, v'hamechabed, if you sweep, v'hamerabet, and you sprinkle, all these different things. So then, if you do any of them, and then you violate a negative commandment, and if you vow in the name of a false god, or you swear in its name, so then again you transgress a negative commandment. So on that point, ki asa Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came to Bavel, so Amar Rabbi Elazar, he said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, al kulam loka, you get lashes on all of them. Chutz mahanoder bishmo, except for vowing in the name of a false god, v'hamakayim bishmo, or swearing in that name. So Maishna hanoder bishmo v'hamakayim bishmo. Why are those treated differently? The low lucky, that you're not subject to lashes. Mishum dahavale lav she'enu bo maisa. It's because there's no action that's involved in them. So haninami, 1 second, lav shebechlalosu. There are a couple of bases for not getting lashes. So one is that there's no action, but another basis for not getting lashes is when the prohibition itself in the Torah is considered a general prohibition, and not a specific prohibition of that particular item. So it's a general prohibition of worshiping false gods, and not a specific prohibition of worshiping, of bowing down or doing some other action that is specifically prohibited. And ve'ein loken alav shebechalos, and we don't usually get lashes for a generalized prohibition. Titania, as we have a brisa, minayin la'ochel min habehema hodeshem tzeitze nafsha. How do I know that if you eat an animal before it's completely dead, shehu below tasa, that you violated a negative commandment? Talmud lomar lo tochlu al hadam. It says don't eat it over the blood. So davar acher, another interpretation, lo tochlu al hadam. We're going to get to the main point of this brisa in a little while. Or actually, it's not even the brisa. It's going to be a statement about the brisa that is going to highlight the point. But in any event, we're going to have now a bunch of lessons that you can learn from lo tochlu al hadam. So what is lo tochlu al hadam? Teach us lo tochlu basar va'adayin dam b'mizrach. You can't eat the meat while the blood is still in the vessel that it was used to catch it for the carbon. So we're talking about a carbon shlamim that you're going to eat part of it. And so the blood needs to be sprinkled on the altar. So Rabbi Dosa Omer, Minayin She'ein Mavrin al Haruge Beistin. How do I know that somebody who is killed by Beistin, there's a special mitzvah that when anybody dies, you're supposed to offer the mourners a special condolence meal that the mourners don't pay for, but rather the community pays for. And of course, we fulfill this even now today with the shuls often buying the meal for when the mourners come back home from the cemetery. So how do I know that when it comes to somebody who is killed by the court, we're not going to do that meal? Talmud lomar lo tochlu al adam. We don't eat on the blood, meaning in this case it's being read as the blood of somebody who was killed by the court. Rabbi Akiva Omer minayin la Sanhedrin shaharguas and nefesh. She'ein toamin klum koloso hayom. How do I know that when the Sanhedrin was going to put somebody to death, that they would not eat that entire day? Talmud lomar lo tochlu al adam. Again, same lesson. Now that we've given all this brisa, there's actually an Amora statement that is related to the same theme, again, of what we learned from lo tochlu al adam, that is going to actually be one that's going to be relevant to us. Not this first one, but the next one. Rabbi Yochanan azharo ben sorah mora minayin. How do I know that there's a warning that a ben sorah mora is prohibited in the Torah? Talmud lomar lo tochlu al adam. You shouldn't eat over blood. V'amar Rabbi Avin Barchia v'item Rabbi Avin Bar Kahana. That one of the Rav Avin said the following: Al kulam eino loka. That you don't get lashes for any of these laws. Mishum dahave le lav shebechlalos. Because all of these prohibitions are based on the prohibition of lo sochlu al hadam, which is not a clear statement that prohibits any one of these, but rather prohibits all of these. So since all of these are subject to this generalized prohibition, it's not going to be subject. So now we have a problem, because Rav Dimi had said in the name of Rabbi Elazar that you get lashes for things that are lav shebechlalos. So Ella he also Ravin Amar Rabbi Elazar. So when Ravin came to Babel, he clarified and he said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, no, Ravin, Rav Dimi had it reversed. Really, it's the following: Al kulan eina loka. No, you don't get lashes for all of these actions. Except for vowing in the name of the false god and swearing in the God's name. So as a result, now and so it's the exact opposite of Rav Dimi, but we still have a problem. All right, so we understand why we don't get lashes for the kissing and the hugging and the etc., because those are all lav shebechlalos. And we don't get lashes for lav b'shebechlalos, as was said by Rav Avin, whether it was Rav Avin Bar Chia or Rav Avin Bar Kahana, it was said by one of them. And so that's so haninami. But what about the other actions, the vowing and the swearing? Lav she'ein bo ma'asen inhu. Shouldn't these be considered prohibitions that involve no action, and therefore they are subject to they should not be subject to any kind of lashes? No, Hahoka Rabbi Yehuda. That Rabbi Lazar's ruling is like Rabbi Yehuda. De Amar Lav She'ein Bo Maisa Loken Alav. He says that you do get lashes for a transgression in which involves no action. Titania Lo Susiru Menu Aboker. We have a prohibition that you're not allowed to leave any of the Pesach offering until the morning. Ba Kazuv Litain Ase Achar Lotase. And the Torah comes and gives us a positive commandment to burn the what's left over, following the negative commandment. And we have a lomar, and as we turn to Samach Gimel Amabet, she'ein loken alav. That tells us that we aren't given lashes for it. Divri Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, and so as a result, we now have another category for which one does not get lashes, and that is a lav shenita la'aseh, a negative prohibition for which there is a positive commandment of how you're supposed to handle it. So, for example, theft is another example where if you steal something, you're supposed to return the item. So, too, when it comes to leaving over the Pesach offering, you're not supposed to do it, but if you do it, then you burn it. And so, as a result, Rabbi Yehuda, and in general, everybody agrees that you're not supposed to get lashes for that kind of prohibition. Rabbi Yaakov Omer, and Rabbi Yaakov says, Lo min Hashem huzeh. That's not the reason. Ela mishum dahavalei lav she'ein bo ma'isa. It's because there's no action involved. V'chol lav she'ein bo ma'isa ein loken alav. And you don't, and any kind of prohibition where there's no action, you don't get lashes. So what's the implication of Rabbi Yaakov, who disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda? The implication of is Miklal de Rabbi Yehuda savar loken alav. Rabbi Yehuda does think you do get lashes, even though there's no action. So we have essentially at least three different categories of situations of prohibitions where you're not going to get lashes, but some of them we have debates about. So we have lav shebechlalos, we have lav hanitak laase, and we have lav she'ein bo ma'isa. So those are three different ways. Again, the first one is a general prohibition. The second one is when there's a positive commandment to fix the item. And the third is when there's no action involved. And so as a result, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with that third category. And so when we saw this statement when Ravin came and made this statement in Rabbi Elazar's name that you don't get lashes except when it comes to vowing and swearing, that was consistent with Rabbi Yehuda's position. Okay, so we're now at the two dots on Samach Gimel and Mabet and top of the page, and we're on to the next piece of the Mishnah. And the Mishnah said, Hanoder bishmo v'hamakayim bishmo harei zeh b'lo taseh. Again, if you make an oath or swear, you violated a negative commandment. Hanoder bishmo v'hamakayim bishmo minalan. How do we know this prohibition? Titania v'shem Elohim acherim lo sazkiru. You should not mention other gods. Shelo yomar adam lechaveru. So the person should not say to somebody, Shmor li b'tzad avodah zara plonis. Meet me next to this idol worshiping location. And by the way, there's a modern day application of that. Which is that you should not use churches and other methods of prayer as a means of providing direction. And so as a result, because again, that you shouldn't use or reference the names of other gods. So lo yishma, so that is not mentioning. Lo yishama al picha, nor should it be heard through you. Shelo yidor bishmo. That tells us that you shouldn't vow in the name of an idol. V'lo yikayim bishmo, and you should not swear in the name. V'lo yigrom la'acherim sheyidru bishmo v'kaymu bishmo, and you shouldn't cause other people. Davar acher, or another understanding, lo yishama al picha. What does it mean that it shouldn't be heard through you? Azhara lamesis ulamadiach. That is a warning to the person who causes either an individual, a mesis, an individual to worship idols, or mediach is one who causes an ir hanidachas, that's one who causes the public to sin with the sin of idolatry. So mesis b'hadjiksipe. 1 second. why do you need to this last interpretation of telling me that a maces is part of the prohibition of lo yishama al picha? We have the fact that there's a more explicit source for that. V'chol Yisrael yishma'u v'yiraun, that all of Israel is going to hear and fear, and they're going to not do such a thing again. And that is a pasuk in Dvarim Perek Yud Gimel pasuk Yud Bet. And the point of that pasuk tells us about an individual who causes another individual to sin. So Ella Azhara Lamadiach. No, so what it really means is it's only a warning for somebody who undermines an entire city and causes the entire city to engage in idol worship. The low yigrom lach. All right, so now we go back to our brisa, and so that was a quick aside, questioning the brisa and fixing the language, or fixing the or clarifying the language. The low yigrom lachem sheyidru bishmo v'sheyikaimu bishmo, and you can't cause others. So I'm sorry. Now we're going back to quote from that brisa, because we said that you can't cause others to vow in the name of the idol or to swear in its name. So misayeya. This seems to support the Shmuel's father, because what does Shmuel's father say? That you're not allowed to have a partnership with somebody who's an idol worshiper. Why? Shema Yischayev lo shvua. Maybe he'll become obligated to swear to you. And what will happen? And he's going to end up swearing using his idol's name. You aren't supposed to cause that kind of thing. So Tosos wonders about how this actually applies to today. And the bottom line is that that in fact, right now, because there are a couple of explanations as to why it doesn't apply, but in fact, well, first of all, there's a debate as to whether or not if the idolater became obligated to swear to you, what happens? Do we say you're allowed to accept the oath, or you're not allowed to accept the oath? Rabbeinu Shmuel, Rashbam says that you're not. Rabbeinu Tam it says that you are, and then there's the discussion as well in Tosos as to whether or not we end up saying that today we have this prohibition. In general, we say we don't, because that they are not even that as to whether or not today, the non-Jews are really idol worshipers. But it's an interesting topic that is beyond the scope of today's daf, but or to the of a daf yomi, or at least my daf yomi share. But I note that is an interesting topic that comes up right here. So kiasa ulabas bekalnevo. So when Ula he spent a night in Kalnevo, Amrle Rava. Veheka Basmar, where were you? Where'd you spend the night? Amrlo, but Kalnevo, I spent it in Kalnevo. So Amarle, V'haksiv v'shem Elohim acherim lo saskiru. You're not supposed to mention other gods. And apparently Kalnevo was another god, was an idol name. Amarle, Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. This is what Rabbi Yochanan said. Kol avodas kochavim shehaksuva b'Torah muter lahazkir shma. No, if it's written in the Torah, you're allowed to mention it by name. But 1 second, where is it written? Diksiv kara Baal kores nevo. That Baal squats, nevo splashes. This is a reference to essentially using the bathroom in front of these idols. But the point is nevo as an idol is mentioned there. The lo ksiva lo, and 1 second, if it wasn't actually written, it would not be permitted to mention it. Masiv Rav Masharshia said, what about the following Mishnah? Ra'achas meruba kashalosh. If one saw, this is a Mishnah in Zavim, and it's dealing with a male emission, and the issue is that if you have a man, in order to be a Zav, needs to have 3 emissions. But what happens if he had a very long emission that is essentially the length that it would take to have 3 separate emissions? So if one saw such an emission, shehi kemigadjon l'Shilo. That's as long as traveling from Gadjon to Shiloh. Now, Gadjon apparently is the name of an idol. So shehein shtei tvilos u'shnei sipugim, which are, that's the time for 2 immersions and 2 dryings, meaning it's enough time to have the emission, go to the mikveh, and then dry yourself off and have an emission again, and then go to the mikveh, dry yourself off, and have the emission again. So you had that length of an emission. So harei zeh zav gamor. That's considered being a zav. And yet here we mentioned gadyon, which apparently is some kind of idol. So Ravina, God nami michtav ksiv. God also is, as an idol, is also written in the Torah. Ksiv ha'orchim lagad shulchan, who set a table for God, and that is they're dealing with, some sort of idol. And so as a result, basically the idea is, although in both of these cases, the name that is referenced is actually longer, it is all based on, it's sort of like adding an additional word to a compound word to the name of the god. And so the name of the god is either God or Nevo, and then they add Kal and Yon to the beginning or to the end, and that is sort of still referencing the name of that particular god. And so as a result, there too, it was actually already in the Torah, and that's why the Mishnah was able to reference it. So Amar Rav Nachman, Kol Leitzanusa Asira. Any kind of mockery is forbidden. We're not supposed to make fun of things. It's not a nice. You're not. It's really just a not a good way of behaving. Except we are allowed to mock idols. Diksiv karabel kores nevo, because it's talking in that pasuk again of using, of defecating and doing disgusting actions. And so that's why we're saying that those idols are only worthy of that. Karsu charu yachtav lo yachlu malet masa. Together they splash and they squat. They could not deliver the burden. Uksiv. And so that's one proof. And similarly, dibru le'eglot Beis Aven Yaguru Shchan Shomron, that because of the calves of Beth Aven, the inhabitants of Shomron will be afraid. Ki avel alav amo uchmarav alav yagilu, that the nation is going to mourn over it, but its priests will rejoice over it. Al kvodo ki gala mimenu, for its glory has departed it. Al tikri kvodo ella Kevedo, that the point is don't read it as Kevodo, it's honor or glory, but rather Kevedo, it's burden, namely, again, some reference to defecating. And so as a result, we are allowed to make mockery of idols, but in general, we should be careful not to be mocking anybody or anything. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, my diksiv, v'atayosifu lachato, v'yasu lahem masecha mikaspam. So with respect to the verse that is said, this is Hosea Perak Gimel Pasuk Bet. Now they sin even more. V'yasu, and they're made themselves molten figures of silver. Kasvunam atzabim, shapes of idols. My kisvunam atzabim. What does it mean in the shapes of idols? Melamed shekol echad ve'echad asa demus yiraso umenicho bekiso, that everybody would have their own image of his own deity, and he would keep it in his purse. B'shah shezokra, and whenever he would be reminded of it, motzia mitoch eko umechabka menashka, he would take it out from his breast pocket and he would kiss it. My zoche adam agalim yishakun. What does it mean? The earlier part of the part of the pasuk that said those who slaughter people will kiss the calves. So Rabbi Yitzchak, Devei Rabbi Ame, Shahayu Misharsei Avodas Kochavim Nosnan Enehem Bevale Mamon. That if you keep track of the people who had idols, they would look at the wealthy people, Umar even as hagalim, they would starve their calves, v'osin demus atzabim, and they would make images of the wealthy people, umamidim bitzad avuseihen, and they would place them near where the calves would eat. So as a result, the calves would think whenever they saw these people, they would eat, and whenever they were hungry, they would want to go to these people. And so what would happen is motziano san lachutz. Then they would take the calves out to the public, and kevan shiro otan ratzin acharehen umimashmishin behen, and the calves would go after them and start cuddling with them. The omrim lo, and now these idol supervisors would say, look, the God wants you. We need to sacrifice you to it. And of course, everybody would say, wow, that's amazing that the animal went to this person and chose this person. But of course, it was all set up ahead of time. And so maybe that's what we're talking about. And of course, obviously, the people who were running the idols would then take all the wealth of the people who they killed for the idol. So what a great system. So Amarava, that doesn't quite fit with our pasuk, because Hai Zovche Adam Agalam Yishakun, that would be those who slaughter people will kiss the calves. Agalam Yishaku Lizbach Adam Mibaile. But I mean, those who slaughter people will kiss the calves. First, it should be those the calves kiss to slaughter a person. Meaning the point is that it's the calves choosing the person that is the key there. So Ella Amarava. So as a result, Rava doesn't like that explanation. Although again, you can fit it in, but Rava offers an alternative explanation. Kol hazoveach es beno la'avodas kochavim. Anybody who slaughters his own son for an idol, Amarlo doron gadol hikrivlo. You offered a great gift to the idol. Yavo v'yishiklo. Come and kiss the idol. And so as a result, that's the story that it's talking about, meaning that we have to, again, all of these things are terrible and we should not do any of them. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. So now we're going to discuss various idols worshipped by the nations that were brought to Eretz Yisrael when Assyria conquered part of Eretz Yisrael and moved around the nations. So Amar Rav Yehuda and removed the 10 tribes and brought others in their place. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, v'anshe Bavel asu es Sukkos benos. The Babylonians made Sukkos benos. Mainihu Tarnagolas. That was a hen. So that was what they worshipped. V'anshe kus asu es nergal. The Kutim made Nargal. Umaynihu Tarnagol. That was a rooster. V'anshe Hamas asu es Ashima. And the people from Hamas, they made Ashima. Maynihu, what is it? Barcha Karcha. That's a bald, translated here as buck, which is Rashi, I think, says that it refers to a goat. V'ha'avim asu nivchaz es tartak, and the avim they made nivchaz and tartak. Umayniu, what were they? Kela v'chamor. They were a dog and a donkey. So again, all these things that these various nations worshipped. V'hasfarvrim sorfim es b'neihem be'esh la'adramelech v'anamelech Elohei safravim sarfravayim. So, and the Sfarvim, they would burn their sons in the fire to Adramelech and Anamelech, the gods of their gods. Umaynihu, what were they? Hapered basus, that's a mule and a horse. Adramelech, how do I know that it was a mule? The Adarle lemare b'te'ina, because a mule honors its master by carrying its burden. But Anamelech, and Anamelech, meaning Adar is to sort of honor, and Melech is a king. So it honors its master. But Anamelech, and that's a horse, Da'ane, because they answer Lemare Bekrava, because a horse responds to the owner in battle. So Afchizkiah Melech Yehuda bikesh aviv lasos lo kain. Even with Chizkiyahu, the king of Yehuda, his father wanted to do this. Namely, this is going back on trying to burn him as a sacrifice. So imo salamandra. But he was saved with with a salamandra. Salamandra is referring to a creature. If we can take a look at Rashi, chaya katana, a small animal, sheyotza mitanur, that sort of survives out of an oven. Sheha'esh bo eres bo sheva shanim, where there was a fire there for 7 years. Bahasach midama, and if you anoint with the blood of it, ein haor sholepo, the fire has no power over you. It's sort of like a fireproof material. Uba'achas matzinu kasav gam et beno ha'avir be'esh v'lo matzinu lo ben ela chizkiyahu. And because we see in Malachim Beth, Perek Tet Zayin, that he passed his son through fire, and yet we don't see any other son other than Chizkiyahu. So it must be that he was able to survive that, and this is the method that he was able to survive. So with that, we will pause for today, and God willing, we will pick up from there tomorrow as we continue our discussion of different forms of idol worship. And I'll just maybe I should have begun with this. And how did we get to idol worshiper in this 7th chapter of Sanhedrin? The Mishnayos are listing off all of the different forms of prohibitions that cause one to be subject to stoning. And this was one of them. And so we're going into some of the details now. Obviously, a lot of these details are also going to be dealt with in Maseches Avodah Zarah. So we'll look forward to picking up from there with Samach Dalid, God willing, tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody.